Welcome back, my fellow patriots, to Save Our Republic Daily video broadcast. Today we're going to be talking about the last amendment to the United States Constitution, Amendment 27. It provides that Congress cannot raise its own salary within the legislative session in which it enacts a pay raise. So in other words, there has to be an intervening election of Congress before the Congress can get a pay raise. So you can't be in office and, for example, in the lame duck, the last few days of a term, and let's say a whole bunch of people have been turned out of office, and then they say, we're going to raise our salary to $10 million apiece for the last 2 weeks of our career in Congress. This was initially, so I want to say there's two reasons why this is really important. First is substantively, and secondly, process-wise, it's a fascinating story. So substantively, I just talked about why it's important to not allow such pay raises to happen because it prevents corruption. It also ensures that those that vote for congressional pay raises are held accountable by the people in an intervening election. So it furthers the social contract. It strengthens the idea of government accountability. It furthers the idea of limited government, that you just can't, have these congressmen go crazy and do whatever they want. So it's fundamental in that way. But procedurally, it's even more interesting, much more interesting. See, this was an amendment that was initially proposed by James Madison back in the late 1700s in connection with the first term of Congress, where they promised, the Federalists did, that if the Constitution was ratified, a Bill of Rights would be adopted. And Madison ended up drafting 12 amendments that were sent out to the states for ratification. And the second amendment is not the one about the right to bear arms, it's this amendment. So you'd say, well, wait a minute. Why isn't it the Second Amendment? Well, it wasn't ratified by the states. There's some speculation that it wasn't ratified because state legislators were concerned that if that was applied to the federal government, it might be foisted onto state governments. Whatever the reason why, it didn't receive the number of votes necessary, ratification of states' votes necessary to become part of the Constitution. The First Amendment offered by Madison was also not ratified and is still yet to be ratified. So a lot of people like to say the First Amendment's about free speech, and it is, but it really wasn't when Madison initially recommended it. Now, how did the 27th Amendment become ratified? Well, there was this young college student, a 19-year-old college sophomore, Gregory Watson. He was at government class at UT Austin. His professor said, write a paper about the government process, and he was an unusual person. He went to the library, started fumbling around with some books about constitutional amendments, and decided that he would write an article about this. And specifically, he said, this amendment is not yet dead. It could still be ratified. There's no provision in this amendment, proposed amendment, which had a time limit. Nowadays, there typically is a time limit at the end of the amendment. Says if it's not ratified within 7 years or some kind of period like that, that it will basically die. But this one didn't have that kind of qualification. And so he believed that it was still alive, and that if another set of states eventually adopted it, meeting the threshold of 2/3 of the states, that it would become effective. He wrote the paper, and he got a big fat C. Watson believed that was not a fair grade, and the professor basically said, get it ratified, come back, and I'll change the grade. So Watson took that challenge, and over a small campaign of his own, aided by some very interested people in various state legislatures, eventually it was ratified. It was codified on May 7th, 1992, when, or at least that's the date that Michigan became the final state necessary for ratification. Became effective a little bit after that. But so 1992 versus when it was first suggested in 1791. So that is a tremendously important lesson for us, not only procedurally, but how one person can make a difference, affect the Constitution by moving forward with a great idea that finally its time had come. Until tomorrow, don't forget about America's Survival Guide at americasurvivalguide.com, Patriot Week at patriotweek.org, the Patriot Lessons American History and Civics podcast. God bless you, and God bless America.